Good afternoon, friends. Feel free to put your name and your location in the chat window if you'd like to know a little bit about who is with us today. I am Jennifer Copeland, the Executive Director of the North Carolina Council of Churches, and I greet you on behalf of the 19 denominations of the Council. These are congregations all across the state, and you might be a member of one of those congregations, or maybe you are just a justice seeker riding the wave the Council has been on since we started out in 1935. We are glad you are here today to talk about Christian nationalism, the most dangerous heresy to our faith in my lifetime. If you have questions at the end of today's content, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to all of those questions at the end. I'm joined today by Kyle Spencer, who began her journalism career at the Daily Tar Heel, rival to my beloved favorite Duke Chronicle. But since that time, she has written for the New York Times, New York Magazine, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, Politico magazine, just to name a few that might be slightly more famous than the Daily Tar Heel. She is a frequent contributor to MSNBC, CNN, and NPR, commenting on democracy building and political advocacy. Within this journey, Kyle has cultivated a particular interest in young people, which led her to write her first political book, Raising Them Right. In this book, she offers a behind-the-scenes account of how the religious right has partnered with billionaire donors, ideologues, and political insiders to lure millions, friends, of unsuspecting young American voters over to the far right. If you've been paying attention to the work of the Council this summer, then you already know that the heresy of Christian nationalism is a major focus of our work. It's worth saying that through 2 millennia of Christianity, teachings have arisen that history later deems heretical. Of course, it's also the case that some things named heresy turn out to be reformation, which has worked well for the 19 denominations in the Council. But sometimes what is branded a reformation is indeed heresy, and it's crucial to know the difference. I believe we are in such a moment right now. We need to recognize the heresy when it shows up in our midst, and we need to help others understand what is really going on in our democracy and in our churches. Kyle Spencer brings us the information we need to know about how our young people are being shaped and sometimes duped by one of the most dangerous ideologies ever to confront democracy and Christianity. Kyle, we are grateful to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you also, Rachel Baker, for helping to organize this. I come to you as somebody who has been traveling around the country for the past 8 weeks talking to citizens, mostly in swing states, about Christian nationalism, Project 2025, our democracy, what's at stake in this upcoming election. And it has been extremely inspiring, inspired by all of you folks who are on the front lines, who are working so hard for our democracy. But it has also been challenging, and I have to say to some extent depressing, to see how much some of this heretical ideology that Jennifer spoke about a second ago has been mainstreamed for folks inside churches and faith communities, inside school districts, on college campuses. And this is, of course, of utmost importance right now as we face this monumental election where we see that democracy is really on the ballot. I want to talk a lot about the connection between Christian nationalism, Project 2025, and our democracy. But first, I'm going to assume that most people here have a pretty clear idea about the basics of Project 2025. Because what I really want to focus on at this 11th hour is how we can talk about Project 2025 and Christian nationalism to people in our communities. But if there's somebody who is really unfamiliar with it, I would be delighted if you could note in the chat that you are completely in the dark and you don't really know anything about it and need a little more specifics, because I want to make sure I'm speaking to the needs of this particular audience, and that we have a limited amount of time. So I want to make sure that I don't waste anyone's time. I think broadly speaking, when we think about Project 2025, we can say that it is the right-wing conservative movement's blueprint to replace American democracy with a Christian nationalist theocracy and to strip us of our fundamental rights. It is okay. I got one. I'm completely in the dark, so great. I will address that. It is a document, 900-page document that was crafted by Heritage Foundation, which is a very conservative think tank out of Washington, D.C. It's a think tank that was founded by a guy named Paul Weyrich. And the reason that is very important is Paul Weyrich is also considered one of the founders of the ultra-conservative movement in this country and the Christian nationalist movement. So he founded the Heritage Foundation, and the work of the Heritage Foundation has been to push very, very, very radical conservative ideas onto the American public, to get those ideas into policy, to get those policies into legislation on the state and national level, sometimes on the local level, and to get those radical ideas the law of the land. So the 900-page document that we refer to as Project 2025 is really the blueprint that a bunch of radical Christian nationalists have come up with that they envision for our future. Now, I want to make it clear that when I speak, I know many of you know this, but I want to make it really clear, and I think it's always important when we talk about Christian nationalism and we talk about Project 2025, that we clarify immediately that Christian nationalism has nothing to do with Christianity. That Christian nationalism is a national movement to rid the separation of church and state and to impose radical ideas held by a very small group of people in this country on the rest of us. Christian nationalism abuses people's faith, cloaks its very bad, draconian, undemocratic ideas in a word that for many people holds great meaning and signifies the exact opposite of what Christian nationalists want. So Christian nationalism has nothing to do with Christianity. And secondly, Christian nationalism has nothing to do with democracy. And if we're unclear on that, one of the most powerful and one of the most well-known statements that was ever made by Paul Weyrich, one of the fathers of Christian nationalism, founder of the Heritage Foundation. One of his most famous speeches was to his quote unquote faith community, in which he told a large group, an auditorium filled with people, that he did not believe that voting was good. That when the number of people who went out to vote went up, the goals of his goals and the goals of his allies went down. So that voting was of no interest to him. We know this, right? Because we're seeing these cruel, undemocratic, obscene efforts across the country to keep people from going to the polls by extremists right now. This was baked into the Christian nationalist ideology and the ultra-conservative movement's ideology for the past 30, 40, 50 years, and was actually iterated by Paul Weyrich in the 1980s to a congregation. And that was just one time that it was iterated. But so Christian nationalism has nothing to do with Christianity, and Christian nationalism has nothing to do with democracy. Christian nationalism is post-democracy. So the folks who are pushing these ideas around Christian nationalism, that we ought to have a radicalized Christianity inside our schools. We ought to have radicalized Christians running our government. We ought to have radicalized ideologies running our own personal lives as it relates to reproductive rights, how we define family, what we do with people who are needing social safety net programs. These are all policies that have nothing to do with democracy, and in many cases have nothing to do with our Constitution. So that is, I think, really important to sort of blanket statement to make clear. The reason that Project 2025 is so important for us to talk about right now is because this 900-page document is the blueprint that a Trump presidency would institute. And also it is a policy, it is a series of policies that even if Trump is not elected, states very clearly the goals of this movement, of this very well-funded, well-organized ecosystem of ultra-conservatives. So what's in this document? Well, the first thing that we want to understand about this document is that this document is not good for children. This document is an enemy of the environment. This document is an enemy of public schools. It is an enemy of American families. And it is in total opposition with our American ideals that we support and help those in need. It supports a kind of skeletal government, a slashing, cutting, closing down of a myriad of agencies, the Department of Education, the EPA, the Veteran Affairs Office. The list goes on. This document would essentially skeletalize our federal government to the point where government would no longer serve the purpose that those of us who believe in democracy understand its goal is, which is to support people, to support us, right? So right now, at this 11th hour, how do you talk to either your parishioners, either the people that you're talking to when you knock on doors, either the friends and family that you have, the women and men in your school district? How do you talk about Christian nationalism, Project 2025, and the threats it poses to our democracy? The first thing you do is you don't overwhelm them with the 900 pages. Now, this document, this Project 2025 document, is divided up into categories, right? So there is stuff in the document about the environment, which would essentially, I'll give you a shorthand, one of the big pushes in this document would be to deny that there's any global warming happening and to get rid of any regulatory agencies that would seek to help our environment improve and to outlaw the kinds of pollution that we know is so bad for our environment. That would be environment. In terms of education, the Project 2025 document has many, many plans. And essentially, the most important one is that it would gut our education system. You in North Carolina are already seeing this huge effort to privatize schools. I think it might have been Jennifer or another activist in North Carolina and leader who told me that it was like, I don't remember, there's 60–80% of schools are now religious run in North Carolina. But anyway, that is Project 2020's plan, is to just absolutely privatize all public schools through vouchers and charters. So to get rid of the types of programs and funding that kids with disabilities rely on, it would encourage pushing into school systems, as we're already seeing in states like Louisiana and Oklahoma, religious education, Bible study, 10 Commandments on the walls, this type of thing. So we can go through all of the different aspects: environment, health. This Project 2025 is in opposition to social safety net programs, health programs, Medicare, Medicaid. We can go environment, we can go health, we can go all, but we don't want to do that. And the reason we don't want to do that is because in this 11th hour, when we are talking to people about Project 2025, the Trump presidency, the threat that we're facing right now in our country, we need to first think about who we're talking to, right? We need to first think about who we're talking to. And we need to think about what it is that the person that we're talking to cares about. Less is more. When you're talking about Project 2025 and Christian nationalism, you do not want to inundate people with the 300 things that you think are important in the document. You want to know the person that you're talking to. You want to listen to them. You either know them, right? It's the mom that you talk to at the school bus, and you know they care about education. So you want to talk to them about what are the parts of Project 2025 that would hurt their kids' education. Or maybe you're talking to a veteran and you want to let them know that Project 2025 would gut veteran affairs programs and funding for vets. Or maybe you're talking to somebody who is been the victim of sexual assault, and you want to talk to them about the ways in which the Project 2025 seeks to create a system in which there's no redress for somebody who is no civil rights redresses. Or maybe you're talking to somebody who loves to go to Asheville, to the mountains, and you want to talk to them about the fact that Project 2025 wants to shut down FEMA, shut down the EPA, literally wants to outlaw any type of federal warnings of the type of environmental disasters that your state has recently faced. If I'm you, I'm focusing a lot on that. If I'm you right now in North Carolina, when I'm knocking on doors, when I'm talking to people, I'm focusing a lot on the way in which Project 2025 would be cruel, unhelpful, destructive to communities that are suffering or going to suffer through environmental incidents. I think right now in your community, that is very resonant. And what you want to be making sure when you're talking about Project 2025 is that you stay very resonant. You don't do, again, less is more. Focus on what you think the person you're talking to cares about, either because you already know or you ask them, and then talk to them about one or two items in Project 2025 that would be bad for them. Now, I'm going to give you some resources. So I'm going to give you some really, really helpful resources. And that's why I don't need to sit here and tell you every single thing that's in Project 2025. So just know that by the end of this Zoom, you will have resources where you can actually click into an issue like health, care about health, and you will get some great information on what Project 2025 would do to the healthcare system in this country, or whatever your issue is. So I just want to let you know that. So don't worry that where you will have the information you need to do this, to have these kinds of simplified conversations with people. So what about Project 2025 and its relationship to Trump? You're going to hear from people, well, Trump says that he doesn't have any relationship to Project 2025. So what do you say to that? Well, first of all, you say Trump says a lot. I'm telling you, even people who are going to vote for Trump will not tell you they believe everything Trump says. So you can say, well, do you believe everything Trump says? Then you can refer them to a series of articles, including an article in the New York Times today about Trump's connection and the myriad of people in Trump's administration past, connections he has now, and folks who he intends to have in his future administration if he wins, their connections to Project 2025. There's literally an article in the New York Times today that you can find online. If you don't want to reference an article in the New York Times, there's a great article which I'm going to put into the chat that CNN did a couple of months ago, a fabulous article that talks about the hundreds of people that Trump is connected to that were connected to Project 2025. You can either send people that article, you can either find some quotes from the article, you can find some data points from the article and share that. So that's the question. Oh no, Trump says he's not involved, so I'm not worried. You listen first, you be specific, talk local, match your medium. Match your medium means that we all receive information differently, right? And the reason I'm talking about match your medium right now is what I just asked you to do was potentially send someone an article, right? Send them the New York Times article or send them the CNN article, right? So you're going to send that article to someone who reads articles. You're not going to send that to someone who doesn't read articles. Match your medium. You like to receive information a certain way. Don't give information to other people the way you like receiving information. Get clear on how the person that you are trying to talk to about Project 2025 likes to receive information. You can assume that if it's a young person, they're probably going to like something visual. You can assume if it's somebody a little older, they may actually like an article. Some people respond really well to podcasts. There is a myriad of information online and a myriad of different ways that Project 2025 is being explained. And it's very, very important that when you are giving information to people, that you give it to them the way that they can receive it. And I think that it's fair to say that conversations can be helpful, but sometimes people need more than conversations, and even conversations are less helpful than a quick video or an article, whatever it is. So be mindful of how people receive information. Talk to the heart. This isn't really about politics. This is about values. It's about community. It's about what world we want to live in and what we stand for. When you're talking about, for example, Project 2025's narrow definition of family, the definition under Project 2025 of family is a man and a woman, married, children. We know that that definition probably doesn't include many people on the Zoom right now, so that many of us do not fit into the narrow definition of Project 2025's idea of a family, which means the types of support, help, funding, programs would not go to a lot of the people in this Zoom. That's the type of personal stuff that you want to be addressing when you're talking about Project 2025. You want to talk to your friends about the fact that the ultra-conservative Republicans' plan for our future is for your sister-in-law and her partner to receive no government benefits for their family. You want to be talking about the anti-LGBTQ aspects of Project 2025 by noting that the transgender students in your son's high school will receive no support. In fact, will be considered enemies of the government in Project 2025. You want to be talking about a gutting of the Veteran Affairs Bureau and funding for vets. You want to talk about the vets in your life. You want to tell your mom, you know what, Mom, if Project 2025 plan goes through, Dad, my brother, our friends, our neighbors, they're going to really hurt. They're going to really hurt. So when I say talk to the heart, this isn't about politics. You want to use those kind of words. You want to use that this is cruel. This is going to hurt people. This is going to leave them without protection. This is going to rob them of freedoms. So you've identified what specifically you're going to talk about with an individual person. You're going to less is more. You're going to be personal. You're going to talk to the heart, and you're going to use personal words: cruel, hurtful, loss of freedom. This is a very mean. It's a really kind of like a bully plan, and I think you can talk about it that way. Finally, you want to make sure that you talk about this program through your values and through the values that you share with the people that you're talking about it with. I have been traveling around, and what I have been hearing is faith communities producing these documents which explain Project 2025 and the value systems that Project 2025 have, and how much that those value systems are in opposition with their own. And I wanted to read something from a chapter of the United Church of Christ in Arizona, where I went, and they had some really fabulous documentation. And this is how they described education, the plan. Project 2025 proposes to eliminate the Head Start program, defund the federal school meal program, defund the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, phase out Title I funding, and completely abolish sex education in schools. Okay, so that's what it would do. One of many things, right? What does that mean to you? What does that mean to the members of that faith community? This is the document that they produced. We believe that all children are children of God, whatever race, gender, ethnicity, body, and mind they have. As a people called to love our neighbors as ourselves, we are called to protect and improve public school as a matter of justice. And it goes on. The reason I really think this is very powerful, because what this does is it makes this not political. It makes it about values, and it makes it about values that we all share. So it really indicates how out of touch these ideas are with the values that most Americans hold. And then it calls people to ask themselves questions about their own values. So I encourage you, as you are talking to people, to connect with them about your shared values when you're talking about this Christian nationalist plan, and to frame this in a value conversation, but a very, very personal one that pinpoints individual people in your communities who will hurt by this program. What is the most common? I'm going to talk for a couple more minutes and then I'm going to go to questions, but what's the most common question I get? The question I get is, what do I do when people say to me, this isn't going to happen here? Project 2025 and these ideas, these plans will not happen here. So the first thing I think you've got to do is you've got to recognize that right now, and I'm speaking to all of you about the entire situation we're facing right now, we have a lot of people in our country right now who are in denial. And they're in denial because the idea of Project 2025 coming to light and Christian nationalism taking hold in the way that those who support Christian nationalism wanted to is so horrifying that I think a lot of people simply can't get it into their head. So this is frustrating for all of us, right? But I think that we have to have empathy for people who really cannot process this at this moment. So the first thing that you need to do when somebody says, this isn't going to happen here, it's not Trump's plan, I don't believe it, you need to say, I hear you. I hear you. And then you need to say, you need to empathize with, I sometimes have a hard time believing it could happen too, right? Hear them, connect with them on that. Then what you need to say to them is, I didn't think Roe v. Wade would be overturned. I didn't think that Trump, a convicted criminal, would run for president. Did you? I didn't think that in Louisiana, the 10 Commandments would be suddenly required in all schools. You know, and did you? And then you want to talk again, personalize it, people in the community. You want to say, but what if it is? What if it is put into effect? What if some of these ideas are put into effect? What will that do? And you name some of the people in the community that you know and that this person knows that would be hurt. And I think one of the most powerful things to say to people at the end of this is, Bobby, Sue, Mom, Dad, Uncle Joe, you know, you might be right. You might be right. But what if you're wrong? I could keep going on. I'm gonna stop now for questions, and I'm also going to find a way to plug into our chat some of the resources that I think will be really helpful for you to pinpoint various points of Project 2025 that you'll want to be talking to people about.
Kyle, thank you. Also want to say to everybody online, we can gather these resources that Kyle is going to share with us and send them out in a follow-up email. We always send a follow-up email after these events, so you'll have all that stuff, not have to worry about cutting and pasting as we go through. Kyle, I'd like to pose a question while others gather their thoughts and think about what they want to hear you say next. Some people among our community know that I worked on a college campus for 16 years before I took this job at the council. And so I ran across these very conservative Christian ideas. I was the Methodist chaplain and part of a religious life staff that had over 20 different faith traditions represented. So I sat, side by side with groups I'm not going to name out loud, but I think many of us know who the conservative Christian groups are. It was always my belief when I was working in that arena that we just had different theological views. Some of us were more liberal, some of us were more conservative. But what I have come to understand now, and I think that you understand probably, Kyle, better than any of us, is that this is a well-designed effort to take over the minds and the faith traditions of our young people, and to create a theocracy in this country that would give us a government-controlled religion. So can you talk a little bit about what you've seen with our young people in our high schools and on our college campuses? Because I know you've been around that block.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. So, first of all, when I wrote my book, Raising Them Right, the reason I wrote my book was because I was working as an education journalist, and I was mostly writing for the New York Times, and I was going around the country to these large campuses. And the storyline that we're still hearing all the time, that these campuses are filled with wokeness, that DEI is out of control, that young people are intolerant, these liberal activist young people are intolerant and won't let anyone else talk. This was the storyline. But what I was finding when I was on college campuses, particularly big state campuses in swing states or red states, I was finding that some of the loudest voices were these radical extremist kids who were working for these groups that were heavily funded by dark money donors who kind of hid behind the scenes and had these kids as their front facing pushers, basically. And so I saw this, the first place I saw this was with the gun rights movement and the campus carry movement. And the campus carry movement is a movement to basically get military grade weapons legalized on college campuses, so your kids and my kids who are going to math class could sit next to someone who had a gun in their backpack. And when I talked to the folks who were, the young people on campuses who were pushing this legislation at their state, the state capitals, they were telling me they were doing this on their own. And I did not believe that. And so I started, I did what a journalist does. I started digging, I started following the money, and I found that actually Gun Owners of America was funding them, was putting millions of dollars a year onto college campuses to push these gun proliferation ideas on college campuses with young people. And it didn't stop there, right? So obviously the NRA does the same thing. I found that the anti-choice groups were doing the same thing. You had religious groups that were doing, the Christian nationalist groups doing the same thing. And then Turning Point USA was one of the groups that I ended up spending a tremendous, libertarian groups, groups that deny global warming, were infiltrating college campuses and recruiting kids in all of these. And then Turning Point USA, which I can talk a little bit about, but all of these groups, what they were really, really trying to do was to normalize very extremist ideas to our young people, to normalize this idea that you would have a gun in your classroom, to normalize this idea that we do not have a global warming issue. And just as like a little anecdote, the way that this worked in one particular instance with these anti-environment groups is the anti-environment groups, and there are many of them, they would have on these college campuses names that sounded like they were environmental groups, okay? They sounded like they were environmental groups. And then they would do things like they would invite kids to hike, to do beach cleanups. They would invite kids to do things that sounded like the type of thing someone who cared about the environment would want to do. And once they were on the hikes and once they were doing the cleanups, they would start to talk to them about the fact that global warming wasn't really a thing, and or that the people that were going to solve our global warming problem were corporations that had created the problem in the first place. It's very insidious, right? And so these organizations were all very heavily, each one of them heavily funded, often by the same dark money donors who understand and have understood for a long time that in order to spread these ideas, a couple of things have to happen. Young people have to be attracted to them. They have to be normalized. They have to be moved away from radical, the radical corner into the kind of like, well, maybe this is something we could consider. And then they also have to be attached to very charismatic leaders. And so that's where someone like Charlie Kirk at Turning Point USA becomes so important. And people like Ben Shapiro and people like Candace Owens, these are all folks who have been taught to go out and spread the radical extremist gospel to young people. And of course, a lot of the groups really, really prey on isolation that a lot of young people feel. We know we have a loneliness epidemic. We all know we have an epidemic with young men, a lack of confidence, a loneliness. These groups are very aware of that, and they create community on these college campuses for young people who feel, and to some extent, isolated. And then also create community for young kids who maybe are people of faith, but then, get sort of radicalized even in their faith. So yeah, that's, I spent a lot of time watching that. It's very scary. It's all part of the same thing. I mean, the folks that fund Trump are the same folks that fund the Heritage Foundation, are the same folks that fund anti-environmental work, are the same folks fund Turning Point USA. And they come together frequently to discuss their strategies, and every sort of thing they do is part of this larger strategy of pushing this radical extremist and skeletal government on us.
Thank you. I know that was a lot. We had a question in the chat about the Defense Department. I wonder if off the top of your head, if there's anything in Project 2025 that specifically addresses the Defense Department.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea with the Defense Department is always that we want to, the allocation of monies is really the hierarchy of funding is like the broader picture of Project 2025 is that the hierarchy of funding is away from social safety net programs, away from healthcare programs, away from education, and into program and away from regulatory issues, and into deporting folks who are from other countries, and I don't know how to put this, but like prioritizing corporate interests and the interests of corporations that build weapons, that support the gas and oil industry, that create pollution and energy issues for us. So it's that, like, the value rubric is high on supporting corporations and low, and that would include defense industry, and low on social safety net and people. So it's the 1% gets benefits, although I don't think anyone benefits from our planet imploding, and the rest of us get screwed.
Put so delicately. Let me, I'm looking at a website from our colleagues at Red Wine and Blue, which I highly recommend, because they have taken Project 2025 and broken it down into nice sound bites. But there's a question about, what are the main points? So I'm going to tell you what they are off of this website. Number one, take away reproductive rights, end programs that address climate change. These are things that Kyle has hit on. End public education, persecute LGBTQ Americans, encourage racial discrimination, mass deportation and reduction of immigration, insert Christian nationalist ideologies into the mainstream, give unchecked power to the president. The last one is terrifying. They're all terrifying, but those are the things that you can find in this 900-page document. Of course, those 8 points have multiple subpoints underneath them about how this would all work and what would happen.
So guys, I just pasted resources. And I do believe, Jennifer, that Red Wine and Blue Project 2025 is one of the resources. Just to echo what you've said, that it's a great, Red Wine and Blue is turning out to be an incredible place for us to go and look at specifics. So I second that as a great resource. If you'll see in the chat right now, it's one of the resources. Another resource that is incredibly helpful is 25and.me. 25and.me. 25and.me is so fabulous. You go to 25and.me and you can put in defense and you can get everything that is whatever Project 2020 I care about. You put in I care about and you can go to, whatever issue you want, and it'll tell you what exactly Project 2025 plans are for that particular area.
Kyle, I don't know if you noticed the question in the chat about other countries in the world where this kind of takeover has been successful or somewhat successful. I know a lot of times people point to Turkey as one of those places, but you may be a lot more well-versed on that than I am.
Yeah, I think the thing that you see is that what we're talking about is extremism. We're talking about religious extremism, and that's where we can all stand up and say that we do not support religious extremism. Like, Christianity does not have a lock on religious extremism. There is religious extremism in Judaism. There is religious extremism in Islam. There is religious extremism in every single religion, and so anywhere that we see religious extremists running countries, we know those are going to be horrible places. So, and you see that in certain Middle Eastern countries. You see that in what we're seeing in some of Eastern Europe now, and even in Russia. Putin has allied himself with the church there and made it very clear that he is in alliance with that there is a state church, and that the state church is is privileged and is in alliance and working in cohorts with the government. So I think that what is important for us to take away is that this is not a problem just for us. This is not just a Christian problem. This is a problem with extremism. And I think when you take it away from when you separate Christianity from the extremist angle, I think it's easier to talk to people about, and then you can point to, well, you have you have Orban, and you have Putin, you have Saudi Arabia, you have these countries, you have Iran, you have these countries where religious zealots run the joint, and they're very, very unhealthy, unhappy places to live where people have no freedoms. So, women don't have rights. Members of the LGBTQ community don't have rights. These countries where religious extremists run, are countries that are run by religious extremists are countries where rights are in constant jeopardy. Do we want to see
Kyle, I don't know if you
Are
want to
there any?
respond to Mr. Galloway's post in the chat about the
Yeah,
lead up to-
responding. Yeah, responding Neil's question, analyzing Trump's proposed tariffs impact on. Oh, this is great. Yeah, I guess this is great. I mean, this is for those of you who can in the chat, Jim has a great response to Neil's question. Is there any point in the past history of the US where something like Project 2020 has tried to take place and maybe succeeded somewhat? If so, how did that turn out? And Neil is referring everyone to this Planet Money. I'm sorry, Jim is referring folks to this Planet Money episode. Jim, are you there? I don't know if Jim's able to comment, but anyway. I'm looking for other questions.
I also want to say there's several movies out right now. Kyle was saying earlier,
Oh, yeah.
sometimes I watch a movie. Bad Faith gives a sort of a tracing of how this has worked its way through American history pretty much since the Civil War. Some of us would argue it goes all the way back to the doctrine of discovery, but certainly the modern Christian nationalist movement could be traced up through, say, the New Deal, really became front and center during the Reagan presidency. A lot of us remember the moral majority. And that would also be when Paul Weyrich kind of became mainstream, right? He was one of the architects of the moral majority and then continued to work his way through different presidential elections and pull levers behind the scenes. And, it's all a piece of a whole, as Kyle has been saying all afternoon. And as we've been saying all summer and into the fall, this is an unholy trinity of big money and bad religion, and then political operatives.
Yeah, and I think as Jennifer knows, I've been traveling around the country with Bad Faith, and some of you may have seen it. It's come to North Carolina. We've been showing it in North Carolina quite a bit. It's a great explainer on how Christian nationalism came to be, who its allies are, and how it's grown and it's the proliferation. And I think the important a couple of things that I think are really important to understand about it, and I think this is also just important for all of us to be thinking about as we are trying to combat it, is that one of the problems that we have, those of us who believe in the separation of church and state, is that a lot of young people are not getting the kind of history and civic education that they need in order to understand that our country was founded on separation of church and state, that our Constitution, our First Amendment, calls for separation of church and state. And I think broadly, as we think about the next, 10 or 15 years and how we're going to really combat this rising movement, one of the things we're going to have to do is we're going to have to start to push civic education and better American history in our schools, so that young people will automatically see that what about the First Amendment? Wait a second, but Bible study in school, wait, what? And when you hear in the movie Bad Faith, you hear extremist Republican leaders who outwardly tell their audiences that there is nothing in the Constitution that calls for separation of church and state. And if you're not versed in the Constitution, you could very easily think, oh, well, I guess that's true, So we know there is so much misinformation and disinformation that's coming from the radical right, from Christian nationalists about so many things. And a lot of it is about, there's so many categories of misinformation, but one category that I think is very problematic for those of us who want to combat Christian nationalism and to explain the dangers of it, is this lack of understanding of what the heck is in our Constitution. And so that is, and I think you see that also with young people in January 6th. Unfortunately, I think what I have found in talking to young people is that if you don't know how the electoral college works, if you don't know how the elections work in the United States, if you don't understand the process, then how, like you could arguably not be so upset about someone disrupting it, right? And I see that, as horrifying as it sounds, because you think, my God, did you see the videos? Like, how could you not be horrified by that? But this relates to a push in North Carolina and in other states for civic education, where kids get out of high school and they understand how elections work in America, so that when people are threatening elections in America, they understand that that's bad. And I think similarly, what we're seeing right now, very, very, very disturbed by, as we all are, by this voter suppression stuff, because we know that there's so many different types of voter suppression, and one of the key types of voter suppression is just making it difficult, right? Adding steps, oh, you got one more step. We know how hard it is to get people to vote, and a great way to get people not to vote is to add another annoying step to voting. And so anyway, under this rubric of civic education, I think, is our belief in free and fair elections, how free and fair elections work in our country, and in the places in the world where they don't have free and fair elections, and what types of tactics do they use in those places. And I think the parallels between what's happening here and some other parts of the world would be very enlightening for young people to learn about. Yes, Jennifer says, it's also important to help folks understand the crucial role of the judiciary branch of our government. Judges are playing a huge role in the superstructure of where the country could go. And absolutely, absolutely. And I will say, when we're talking about, the 11th hour, that's when we want to kind of reduce it down. And I think what we saw in Wisconsin, those of you who followed the Judge Janet race in Wisconsin, and those young kids on those college campuses, and how they got pretty reductive, but they made it very, very clear to their peers that if they wanted to, that the judicial branch would control reproductive rights, and that if they could keep a Democrat there, that they would have their reproductive rights be preserved. And for those of you who watched it, there was like actually some of the most effective videos were like dancing for this judge. But any way we can, like this really relates to my conversation about matching the medium. Like, you really have to use mediums and conversations that people can hear. And so understanding the judicial branch and its power, particularly when we're talking to young people, one of the best ways to do that is to talk about an issue they care about and directly link it to the state or federal Supreme Courts, and how they control that issue.
All right, friends, we're winding down the hour. Are there any pressing questions that you want to toss our way? Oh, good question. Will Project 2025 still exist? I think it will.
Neil, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, so yes, of course it will, because a lot of Project 2025 can be a lot of the plans can be instituted on the state level. So for example, infiltrating religious studies in our schools, or it's a policy, but it's also like a value. And so those are the types of things that state legislatures can pass. Even though we talk a lot about the Department of Education and why it's important, the reality is that most funding for public schools in our country comes from the state level. It's actually a small percentage that comes from the federal, from the Department of Education. So defunding our schools is something that's going to happen on the state level, right? We know that states can have enormous impact on reproductive rights. We know that book banning can happen on the state level. We know that gag orders are already happening all over the country, where teachers are being told you can't say gay, you can't teach sex ed, you can't. In Florida, Florida is really a test case. for the types of things that Project 2025 will and can do in our country. Statewide, in Florida, teachers are not allowed to talk about racial past, civil rights. I was at a conference in Florida 2 years ago where college professors were taking down. This is so horrifying. They were concerned about some of the legislation related to discussions of history and race, and anything that was potentially now illegal. And they were preemptively, one professor talked about taking down a poster of Martin Luther King in their office. So that's not chilling. I don't know what is. But so yes, Project 2025 does not need a Trump to continue to work its black magic. It will go forward. These, as we all know, these folks are extremely well organized and they are very savvy. And we all know that they've done tremendous amounts of works creating super majorities in state capitals around the country, including in your state. And they did that because they know much of this can be done on the state level. So I like that question so much because we are not out of the woods if we keep Trump out of office. We are not out of the woods. I know you all know that more than anybody, but this document isn't going anywhere. And the document, the values and the plan of this document are already being instituted around the country. So the way that the radical right works and these extremists work is that they create legislation. They have these kind of bill mills where they create legislation and then they pass them, they start in Florida, they pass something in Florida, and then they pass it in Oklahoma, and then they pass in Louisiana, and then they come at, so that's the plan. So if you see legislation in other parts of the country, state legislation that passed, you should expect it to come to your state legislature.
Thank you, Kyle. I think it's important also to recognize that these things we're talking about today and that we've been talking about really for the better part of this year were the long game. It was a long building process. I think it went, as I've said, back to the New Deal when the dark money began to enter our system, and then Reagan when the bad religion started to enter our system. But we need to remember that Christianity's been around for 2,000 years, so we've got a longer game. And what we need to do is be diligent and be faithful and hold true to the values that are important to us. It's not going to be over 2 weeks from today. It's going to be something that we will always have to do as people of faith, to hold true to our democracy and to hold true to the claims of the gospel. So but I would like to leave you with that thought, and also we will pile resources into your inbox by the end of today or first thing in the morning. And Kyle, I want to express my appreciation to you for taking time out of a busy travel schedule to spend some time with us and explain the things that you know so well, and to continue to raise our awareness about what's going on, because really at the end of the day, that's what is most important, is for us to have as much information as possible so that we will know how to address the issues. Would you like to send us out with any closing thoughts, Kyle?
Yes, thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank all of you for being here. I live in New York City, and it's hard to watch what's going on in this country, and I'm doing everything I can, but it does not match what it's like to be in the trenches. And I know you all are really in the trenches. And so I want to tell you how thankful I am for your work and how grateful and how much respect I have for you. I also want to tell you that I was actually in North Carolina a couple weeks ago, and somebody raised their hand. It was a minister who said that they said, I can't do this alone. And I want to reiterate that you cannot do this alone. We cannot do this work alone. We must work together and create coordinated efforts and meet and convene and plan and plot. And so I just encourage you to continue to gather and to organize and to cooperate and collaborate. And I am included in that. I'm trying to do that as much as possible because we cannot fight this alone. We have to fight this together. So
all right. Thank you, folks. And thanks for spending your lunch hour with us. We'll be in touch later.